And it's interesting that a week ago I started researching your videos, and for the first time I discovered a scientist and not a conspiracist, talking about the possibility that there might be life after
They can.
death.
Of love. That's what I believe. I am totally convinced. And I am convinced by my experiences throughout my professional life, especially, fundamentally, through NDEs, near-death experiences. They are a phenomenon, experiences that patients have whom we diagnose with clinical death for various reasons. That is, they are in cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, without reflexes and without brain activity. 15, 20 seconds after the heart stops, the electroencephalogram is flat. That is, these patients have no mental brain activity. These patients, the ones we managed to recover with cardiopulmonary resuscitation measures, well, some of them shared a series of experiences and events that caught my attention. And then I dedicated myself to researching, looking for literature, contacting experts in other disciplines to find what every scientist seeks in the face of a phenomenon, whether organic or emotional, which is the cause, what we call idiopathogenesis, or the intimate mechanism of production. It was precisely because of a patient. That day I was the head of the emergency department at my hospital, the University Hospital of Belviche, who had a very serious traffic accident. And they brought him to the hospital, and upon admission, the diagnosis was already clinical death. He had several fractures, he had hemorrhages, etc. That is, he was with the characteristics we mentioned. We revived this patient with the resuscitation procedures, which you are already aware include the external cardiac massage, intracardiac injection with adrenaline to enhance the heart's contractility, and subsequently using the defibrillator, the electric shocks, to recover cardiac contractility. The patient was revived, we operated, and he fully recovered in the postoperative period. It was the first case that he reported to me, and I had no prior experience with this phenomenon. And he recounted a very typical near-death experience which sparked my interest. That day, at the emergency service of the University Hospital of Belviche, and I operated on the patient.
How long was it from the end of the operation until he was revived and told you about the experience?
Several days, because this patient also had a cranial trauma, and he spent days intubated, monitored, in intensive care in a coma, and when he finally regained consciousness, he was then transferred to my surgical ward. So 2 or 3 weeks passed when he told me about this experience.
How intense, Mother of God. I haven't said anything in this podcast, but it's like I don't know what to add. I'm intimidated.
It's truly difficult for me to process how it's possible for the patient to describe something like that to you, and especially how you don't find alternative explanations. If the patient was in a coma, didn't you think, well, what he's telling me are hallucinations typical of any dream? What led you to believe they weren't hallucinations, but that something genuinely unusual was occurring?
Doctors, the education of doctors, is what I provide to my students of medicine, or used to provide, and to postgraduate residents. We instill and educate them with the Cartesian and Newtonian scientific method, a materialistic objective method. Therefore, I possess this kind of training. And precisely when the patient told me this, I was the first surprised, because I thought and reasoned, quite rightly, because I treated the patient. I said, if I have this patient dead for several minutes, how can it be that during these minutes, this patient tells me things that are spectacular in what they recount? It is truly astonishing what they recount. So I, due to my scientific training, thought, these are hallucinations, I can't explain it. So I sought advice and information from other medical professionals from various disciplines. I contacted neurologists, experts in neurophysiology. I contacted psychiatrists and psychologists, experts in the psychic life of the human being, to see if they could explain to me what the intimate mechanism of production of this was. Because I, with my materialistic training of the scientific method, I couldn't find explanations. And the meeting was very curious. I explained, I see this. They didn't even let me finish presenting my request. They told me these are hallucinations, because nerve cells are very sensitive to the lack of blood supply. And if there is cardiac arrest, they don't receive blood. And
In what one knows, right?
quickly, their physiology is altered, and then their dynamics change, and they say things that don't make sense. They classified them as hallucinations. And then I said to them, let's compare it. I said to them, the hallucinations you see in your patients, do they have a logical structure? They say no. They are completely absurd. The hallucination of a patient, as seen, for instance, in a psychotic episode, in schizophrenia, any type of hallucination that psychiatrists observe, are nonsensical, lacking any logic. I told them the experiences that have been shared with me are extremely logical. Secondly, I told them patients repeat a series of items. That is, from one patient to another, a series of items are repeated. The differences are more of nuance than conceptual. They tell me, no, the hallucinations have nothing to do with one patient and another. They are totally different. Thirdly, my patients remember this for their entire lives. It's a huge impact that affects them. And no, hallucinations, they even feel ashamed. They forget them and don't want to know. And ultimately, near-death experiences impose a deeply profound psychological impact on patients. It transforms their existential understanding and changes their vital dynamics, their life role. Hallucinations, they don't want to know anything. So I said, it has no clinical relation to a near-death experience. They acknowledged it, but there's more still.
Let's move on to explain what the experiences the patients told you were.
They are very long, but I will go to the most important data because they explain many details. The first thing they notice is an out-of-body experience. From an elevated position, they see perfectly what is happening. They are immensely surprised because they see their body on top of a stretcher and a group of medical staff performing resuscitation maneuvers, and they don't comprehend what's happening. They can't communicate with the medical staff. They can't communicate in their current state using usual means like speaking, etc. So, for example, another case, which was precisely a healthcare worker from my hospital who knew us, approached me as I was resuscitating him, tried to touch me, and upon contact passed through. They see themselves with the structure and shape and design they fully self-recognize. To the extent that they say, for instance, I told them, it's intriguing because during this phenomenon, they explain what's happening at distances. He told me precisely what was occurring throughout my entire emergency service. What was in the next room, what was happening in the operating room, which is far away, but other patients. There are cases documented in the biography that tell you about someone being resuscitated in the United States with everything happening in the antipodes in Australia. So I asked them, how is it that you can move in this manner? They say, if I think I'm in Australia, at that very moment I'm in Australia. And they recount exactly what's happening, down to the smallest detail of what's occurring at the distance they desire. For instance, what my patient told me, I later verified with the computers, and exactly, there was the staff he told me about, the patients there, in the operating room. They told me they were operating on a femoral neck fracture. The trauma team, indeed they were. That is, they tell you with complete accuracy. Next, after going through all this situation, they have a sensation of peace, harmony, joy. They connect with beings, which they refer to as beings of light, who assist them. And they can also contact already deceased relatives. This is very typical. This patient contacted her mother, who had died. She was tremendously happy. And finally, they all talk about a light they see. When they see the light, the sensation of peace, harmony, joy, and above all, love, they reach levels never experienced in the human dimension. It's common that, like a screen, they see life, as if it were a screen, the most important events. This can be complete or incomplete. That is, they can have all the items, or they can be total or partial.
But there are always items that
These
repeat.
data, some or others, they always have. They are even classified according to the number of items they have. This classification was made by Bruce Grayson, an American. According to the number of items, they are classified as more or less. And finally, the beings of light said, you must return to your body because you haven't completed your life cycle in the human dimension, which is three-dimensional from an energetic perspective. And they refuse. They don't want to leave, because the sensation of peace and harmony is so extraordinary. who express a reluctance to return, yet they found themselves compelled to do so. This is essentially what the patients recount. You'll find that I have only a limited number of cases, but there are countless and numerous writings in world-class research centers, academic institutions, with individuals, including Nobel Prize winners. That is to say, this is a fact really demonstrated countless, thousands and thousands of times. It's not an anecdotal thing, but it's very frequent. And interestingly, they all explain the same thing with changed items. Here, they also incorporate landscapes, add music, and include many side aspects, which some choose to include or not. But more or less, the important ones that repeat are those I've mentioned.